Good afternoon, everybody. It is really good to be talking to everybody again. It's been a while since I've done one of these, probably about 10 days or so. So I'm going to be a little rusty, but it's going to be okay. It's all going to be fun in the long run. I'm GW, and this is a blog of what's going on in my life in different times. So let me just try to talk here a little bit. I've got a sister in law who says that I have a story that I need to tell. So I am going to try to tell this story. Now, she says that once I healed up from this story, that she thought it was, in her words, a real hoot. So I am going to try to make it so that it is as straightforward as I can. I'm really not trying to be funny or anything here because, as most people will tell you, I am not a funny person. So, anyway, here goes. So, my daughter, who is now 27 years old, was about 5 when this happened. So that was 22 years ago. Now, at that time, my wife and I and my daughter, we were visiting my sister-in-law, and we went up to where they lived up in Wisconsin. And it's a beautiful little town. And we were staying in their area, actually at their house. And my brother-in-law at that time was a really good bowler, and he liked to go bowling a lot. And of course, my daughter really enjoyed doing anything that he enjoyed doing. So we went bowling. Now, the two girls, they went out shopping. And so my wife and her sister went out shopping, and they were planning to have a good time, spending whatever was in our wallets for them to spend. So we went to this bowling alley, and we did this upright. We had the bumpers up because my daughter was about 5, and she got to throw one frame, and then it was my turn. And well, unfortunately, I must have stepped in a spot of water or beer or something, as I was bringing my shoes back and put them on. So because the bottom of the shoe was wet, I stuck on the floor. And so I started hopping, toward the line. And because it was just a friendly match, no money involved, we were just going to have a good time. I just let myself be carried over the line. Well, unfortunately, at that time, well, this is where all the good stuff happened because they had just oiled the lanes. So I sat there as I went over the line and I threw the ball and my arm was up and then I went down and I landed on the ball return. I later found out that I had put 2 fractures in the ball of the upper arm and I had 3 broken ribs. So somehow this is a good story. So I'm now sitting there and I'm looking at my daughter and I'm going, wow, here's a 5-year-old looking at her dad, who is now laying prone just beyond the thing. And I'm sitting there kind of sorting out how badly am I hurt, realizing that it's not good. And I go, well, if I don't stand up right now, she's going to see me carted away, on a gurney. So I somehow managed to get to my feet and got back and sat down. And now, I am all hunched over and it is really not good, not good. So we sit there and we go, well, what's our options? Well, my brother in law sat there and helped me put on my shoes because I was not able to lean over and tie my shoes. And so he helped me put on my shoes. And my daughter and he, we started walking very slowly because it was not fun for me. And we start walking out. And as we're walking out, now remember, we had 3 bowlers. One of us had thrown 1 frame. I had thrown 1 ball, and the other bowler hadn't thrown anything. And the guy behind the counter, some high school kid who was trying to earn a living, trying to buy his gas for the night, he sits there and he looks at me very straight, right in the eyeball, and goes, "Don't you think you ought to pay for your line?" And I looked at him like he had three heads, and at that time, I'm pretty sure he did. And I noticed that the manager, the older guy, was coming up behind him and was kind of pulling him off. So I just continued out the door because I really didn't think that I was going to be in any shape that I was going to want to pay for that line that I just did. So we ended up going to the hospital. And we go into the emergency room and they put me in a wheelchair and I am literally, I am all crumpled up. I'm really in quite a lot of discomfort. And they sit there and they're doing this and they take me back in for x-rays. Now, I don't forget the exact timing of this, but I believe they took me back in for x-rays and then they had me stand up and they said, okay, now you want you to move your arm out like this. Well, that was a movement that with my shoulder was pretty much impossible for me to do. And the lady who was doing the technology of the x-ray, I mean, she's sitting there and I can tell that as she's looking at me doing this, she's going, oh my, oh my, oh my. And it was, from a nice, friendly, upbeat to by the time I walked out the door, it was like I was on my third row of death. And so I'm headed back into the thing and my wife comes in. Now, my brother-in-law, I'd called my wife and she had come and she and my sister-in-law were not real happy because they were just in the middle of their first store when they got the call. And so they come in and my wife jumps in front of me and she puts her face right next to mine and she goes, was this heart? Was this your heart? And I go, no, it wasn't. It was not my heart. It was just my pure clumsiness and everything. And so she felt a little bit better when I said that. I didn't feel any better, but she did. And so at that time, we then waited for a while. And the doctor comes out and calls me in, and I go in, and we have a little discussion. And he goes, well, the good news is that your lungs have not collapsed. And I was kind of forced to agree with him that was pretty good news. And he goes, okay. So I go, what are you going to do? And he goes, really, nothing. Here's a sling, to kind of stabilize your arm. And so he puts a sling on and he does that. And I go, what about the ribs? And he goes, nah, we don't wrap ribs anymore. That really is counterproductive. So all you need to do is just go home, rest. Here's some pain medicine, and don't do anything radical. Okay, so well, we would plan to spend 3 or 4 days up there with my sister-in-law, and this was the first night that we were there. So we go to their house, and their house is a very nice house and is set up very comfortably for them. And my brother-in-law had a nice recliner, and so I said, well, I believe that recliner is mine for the rest of the weekend. And so I went in and I sat down, and they had a dog that was probably 2 or 3 years old at that time. Wonderful dog. Wonderful dog. I think the dog's name was Belle, but a wonderful dog, but hyperactive. And I'm sitting there going, if I get bumped, I'm going to start crying. And I really don't want to start crying in front of my daughter because it sets such a bad example, for a little child when their dad is bawling his eyes out. So I'm sitting there and they go, oh, we have a solution for this. Here is a zapper that we use. So they put the collar on him and they give me the zapper. And every time that dog got within about 5 feet of me, by the end of that weekend, that dog would not spend any time near me. And I don't really, never really liked me again after that weekend. I'm not really sure what that was about. But I sat there during that weekend and just kind of recuperated and everything and did that. And I go back and I think about that and I go, it wasn't the worst weekend I ever spent in my life. It was kind of relaxing. I wasn't really in a lot of discomfort because I wasn't moving around very much. Everybody else was going off and doing their thing and not bothering me. And when they were home, they were all catering to me because I was the one in the chair that was hurt. That's not a bad thing. It worked out pretty well, in all honesty. But then 2 days later, 3 days later, we had to go home. Okay, so I had to get in the car. Now, luckily, I didn't have to drive. My wife is more than capable of driving 5 or 6 hours. It was going to take us to get to our home. But I had to sit there, and I'm now in a position where every bounce in the road, every turn, everything made the ribs move, made everything move. So it was not the most comfortable ride home that I've ever had. Now, when I got home the next day, I went to the doctor and sat there and checked in and brought the x-rays down that they had given me, and he took more x-rays and everything else, and he goes, okay, so what do you think? And he goes, well, your lungs are fine and the ribs are doing okay, and the fractures in the shoulders have not displaced, so they're holding in place. So all you got to do is basically have your right arm in a sling for the next month or so, 6 weeks, and then it'll be all better. So I did that, and I did what he said, and tried to move my arm around and everything else. At the end of that, though, my shoulder didn't move like it's supposed to. So, of course, you get rehab. So I get to go into rehab. Now, I go into rehab, and I have this very nice young lady who is over there, weighed about 100 pounds. I weigh about 220. And, she goes, well, let's see what kind of movement you have. And she wants me to put my arm behind myself. Now, when your shoulder doesn't work right, that is a very difficult movement. And then I discovered that a 100-pound woman can cause me to levitate with one finger, because she took one finger and put it underneath my hand and my back and tried to raise my back up. And I swear to God, I lifted off the ground just, as she did this, because I just could not stand it. So anyway, this was the story that my sister-in-law says I should put on this blog because she thought it was funny. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly hope that my sister-in-law listens to this, because this was her idea. And I have to admit that I kind of enjoyed telling the story. So remember, I'm GW. Look down at the bottom of your page there. You should have a subscribe or a follow or something down there to do. Do that. Make sure that you know that I'm being watched, or that I know that I'm being watched. And hopefully this will all work out for the better. By the way, if you want to go bowling, don't go beyond the line. It really is not a good idea. Take care, everybody. Really enjoyed it. Again, I'm GW. Have a good weekend. Hi, everybody. This is GW. I just want to do a part 2 on this bowling for fun. After I did this, and a couple of folks were able to go out and watch it, they said you forgot a couple of parts, and there's a couple of parts on here that are kind of interesting, and at least to the people who talk to me. So I'll do this for them. So the first one is at the time of the accident. As we went to the emergency room, my brother-in-law drove me to the emergency room, and you recall this is after he had to help me tie my shoes, and we walked out to the car very carefully, and we got into the car, we're headed to the emergency room. We get there, we're checking in, and while I'm getting settled in the wheelchair, he's calling my wife, and my wife is at probably a TJ Maxx or something at that time with her sister. And the two of them are there. And my brother-in-law goes, hey, Gail, good old GW here, Gail fell. And my wife, being the caring person that she is, she immediately responded back and said, well, did you pick him up? And then to her benefit, or to her credit, she then got more concerned when he said, no, you don't understand. We're in the hospital. We're at the emergency room. And so they dropped everything and they headed over there. And that's when she, looked me in the face and said, is this your heart? But, that was such a caring moment on her part to sit there and go, well, pick him up. So I thought that was nice. Now, the other part that people have mentioned to me is that after we got home and we were, been there probably about a week. And, at that time, I had my arm in a sling and, still the ribs were still, not even close to healed. And I was really uncomfortable. But a friend of ours, their daughter was graduating from high school. And so we went over to their house at a graduation party. Now, of course, about the only thing that I was able to do was to sit down. Now, that was the good news. The unfortunate news is that a day or two before that, my wife had gone out and tried to get food that I would be able to eat easily with one hand, with just my left hand. And so she got a bunch of strawberries. Now, I have never really liked strawberries. I never really disliked them, but so I'd eat a few every now and then. And but for the most part, they were not on my list of things that I would buy for myself. But they were, in that case, they were a good food because they were, able to be reached, finger food that I could reach with my left hand and be able to eat and comfortably do that. Well, unfortunately, we found out that I'm allergic to strawberries, and so I'm now sitting there with a rash, from right at my chest level, down to about halfway on my thighs, and it's just a full body rash from that time. And now I was at a real disadvantage because, when you have a rash like that, it is itches terribly. But I was sitting there with only one hand to be able to itch with. And so I felt like I was really at a disadvantage there as I was trying to take the itch off of that. But anyway, went over to the party and sat down, and it was a great party trick, particularly to show all the kids what my rash looked like on my stomach. They all enjoyed that greatly. So anyway, those are 2 points that people thought that I should have put in here, and they were hoping that. Waiting to hear that when it ended. So that's kind of a part two to this. Now, remember, I'm GW. Go down below, do what you have to do to subscribe or follow. But do hope you enjoyed it. And by the way, I have not eaten a strawberry since then. So everybody, have a good time. We'll talk to you later.